the tallis and restrictions that may be applicable towards its usage. So let us begin with an introduction on the discussion of using a mitzvah item for another purpose, a non-mitzvah purpose, and when it is allowed and when not. So in general in halacha we find two different concepts of holiness that are given over to items of a mitzvah. One is defined as tashmishe kedusha, and the second is defined as tashmishe mitzvah. What's the difference between them? Well, superficially nothing. They both involve items that are used for a mitzvah. Their difference is in the halachic status of those items as to whether they receive a very severe status of kedusha called tashmishe kedusha or a lesser status of kedusha called tashmishe mitzvah. If it receives the lower status, then its restrictions are less than is the level of tashmishe kedusha. So it's explained in Maseches Megillah 26b and in chapter 42 in the Shulchanaruch, these different concepts of Tashmishe Kedusha and Tashmishe Mitzvah, and there it is explained that while Tashmishe Kedusha cannot be used for any mundane purpose whatsoever, such as tefillin and a mezuzah, nonetheless, Tashmishe Mitzvah at times is permitted to be used for a mundane purpose. Now, the status of a tallis is not Tashmishe Kedusha, but rather Tashmishe Mitzvah. And being that that's the case, it is possible that at times it is permitted to use a tallis for a mundane purpose, even though it is technically a mitzvah item. What is this dependent on? Well, as we will soon see, there's a difference in halacha between the actual strings themselves, the fringes, versus the actual garment, the beged. And in addition, there's a difference between a kosher tallis, which can still be used for the mitzvah and is actively still used for the mitzvah, versus a non-kosher tallis, a tallis that is not usable because its strings are invalid and thereby is no longer fit for the mitzvah. So let us begin with regards to the law of the tzitzis strings and whether the strings themselves may be used for a mundane purpose or not. So it's recorded in the Shulchanaruch and Orach Chaim, chapter 21, halacha 1, in the Mechaber and the Alter Rebbe, and likewise in chapter 42, halacha 6 in the Shulchanaruch of the Alter Rebbe, that so long as the tzitzis strings are still attached to the tallis and are maintained as kosher, it is forbidden to use them for any mundane purpose outside of its mitzvah use. You can't use it for anything else, as using it for any other purpose while it's still fit for its mitzvah and still used for its mitzvah is considered a belittlement of the mitzvah, otherwise known as bizui mitzvah. In other words, although there in the Shulchan Aruch it's explained a distinction that when the tzitzis strings are removed from a tallis and are thus no longer being used for the mitzvah, then there is no prohibition of bizui or using it for a mundane purpose applicable to the strings, as written in the Gemara in Megillah that we mentioned. This only applies when it's no longer fit for the mitzvah. But so long as it's still attached to the tallis for the mitzvah, then the full strength of the prohibition of tashmishe mitzvah applies, and it cannot be used for any other purpose. An example of this would mean that it cannot be used to tie something. You can't use your tzitzis strings to tie something with them. You also cannot use them to get someone's attention. Sometimes you want to get someone's attention by taking a tzitzis string and putting it by their ear or putting it by any other part of their body. Since you're using for mundane purpose and it's a kosher tallis with kosher tzitzis, it's forbidden to be done. According to the Alter Rebbe and majority of the Achreinim, this applies even when you're not wearing the tallis, even if it's sitting on your table. So long as it's fit potentially still for the mitzvah, then you cannot use it for any other purpose whatsoever. However, while it's on you, everyone agrees that it is considered for a prohibition to use it for any mundane purpose. This prohibition of using the tzitzis strings for mundane purposes applies whether to the tallis gadol, whether to the tallis katan, and applies whether it's a tallis of a child or of an adult, and it applies even if one made a stipulation prior to purchasing it that he's going to be able to use it for mundane purposes. Stipulations don't help regarding this matter. All the above discussion that we had until now is regarding the tzitzis strings itself. Now, what about the actual garment? Does that have the same restriction that we mentioned, that it cannot be used for any mundane use since it's still being used for the mitzvah? Or is it more lenient? So one thing is clear in the Shulchan Aruch, that it's forbidden to use a tallis, the garment itself, whether a tallis katan or a tallis gadol, for a belittling purpose such as to clean up a spill of dirty water on the floor and anything of the like. What the poskim, however, discuss is what about a non-belittling mundane use, such as, for example, to clean your glasses, such as, for example, to use it to open up a can, to open up a bottle that's having some difficulty opening, and so on and so forth, the cases where it's not belittling, but it's mundane. Is it permitted to use the garment of the tallis for that purpose? So practically this matters a machlekes in the achreinim. Some achreinim, some poskim rule that in this matter, the garment has a lesser stringency than the actual strings. By the strings we agree cannot be used for anything at all, since it's still fit for the mitzvah. But the garment we're going to be more lenient with, and you may use it for non-belittling usages. However, the majority of achreinim argue on this approach and rule that even the tallis, so long as it's fit for the mitzvah, it's attached with tzitzis, and you use it, then it may not be used for any purpose whatsoever, even if it's not belittling but is mundane, and thereby would attain the same rule as the tzitzis and be prohibited in use in all scenarios and all cases. Practically, how do we rule? So the Kaf HaChaim writes that we are stringent even by a tallis katan, as practically today even a tallis katan is worn for the sake of the mitzvah, and therefore the entire concept of a tallis today is a mitzvah status, and therefore we are going to give even a tallis katan a status of the strings, and it's not allowed to be used for any mundane purpose. So to summarize, a kosher tallis, which means a tallis that contains kosher tzitzis, may not be used for any mundane purpose, even if the purpose is not belittling, and this applies both to the garment and to the strings, and this applies whether to a tallis gadol or a tallis katan. Now we're going to give some examples of belittling matters that may not be done with the tallis or tzitzis, and then we'll go into non-belittling matters. So belittling matters that cannot be done to the tallis or the tzitzis, according to all opinions, is you cannot wipe sweat from your body using it, you can't use it to scratch your hair, you can't clean dirt with it, you can't clean your dirty hands with it, you can't clean your wet hands on it, you can't clean utensils or fruit that are wet on the tallis, as all these things are defined as belittling according to all. Furthermore, based on what we explained, that you cannot even use the tallis for non-belittling purposes, it is thereby also forbidden to use it, whether the strings or the actual garment, for any of the following matters. You cannot use it in order to tie something to it, whether you're using the strings to tie or the garment to tie. You cannot wrap things inside of your tallis or tzitzis. You cannot use the tallis as a cushion to sit on. You cannot use the tallis as a tablecloth, unless it's being done for a Sefer Torah, as is commonly done. You cannot use it as a curtain, and you cannot use the tallis for cleaning your eyeglasses, as we will now discuss. It commonly occurs while you're reading or davening or learning something that you realize your eyeglasses are a little bit dirty and you don't have something available to clean it. Can you use your tallis to do so? So if using the tallis to clean eyeglasses is defined as belittling, then according to everybody it would be forbidden to be done with any part of your tallis. However, if we would just consider it to be a mundane act that's not belittling, then there's room for discussion. As we discussed before, that there's an actual dispute if the garment of the tallis may be used for mundane, non-belittling actions. Practically, the poskim rule, as we've already mentioned, that you may not use your tallis even for mundane, non-belittling actions. And furthermore, there is a lot of argument to say that cleaning dirty glasses with your tallis is belittling and thereby will be forbidden according to all. And therefore, practically, one is to be stringent in this and not do so.